What happens when one of America's most respected news anchors decides she's had enough of royal excuses and unleashes a verbal takedown that leaves a prince speechless? Today we're diving into the most explosive celebrity interview clash of the year, where Savannah Guthrie absolutely dismantled Prince Harry's carefully crafted narrative in front of millions of viewers. This wasn't just an interview, this was a masterclass in journalism that had social media buzzing for weeks. Make sure to subscribe and drop a comment telling me which moment shocked you the most, because trust me, you're not going to see this coming. The Today Show studio was buzzing with its usual morning energy as Savannah Guthrie settled into her chair across from Prince Harry. The Duke of Sussex had arrived, promoting his latest venture, expecting the typical softball questions that usually accompanied royal appearances on American television. What he got instead was a journalist who had clearly done her homework and wasn't about to let celebrity status shield him from accountability. "Prince Harry, thank you for joining us this morning," Savannah began, her tone professional but carrying an edge that seasoned viewers would recognize. "I want to start with something that's been troubling a lot of our viewers. You've spent years criticizing the British press for invasion of privacy, yet you've written tell-all books, given numerous interviews, and now you're here promoting another project that reveals intimate family details. How do you reconcile that contradiction?" Harry shifted slightly in his seat, clearly not expecting such a direct opening. "Well, Savannah, I think there's a fundamental difference between taking control of your own narrative and having lies spread about you in the tabloids. When you're constantly being misrepresented, sometimes you have no choice but to set the record straight yourself." Savannah's eyebrows raised almost imperceptibly. "Set the record straight by airing private conversations with your father and brother, by sharing details about family arguments that occurred behind closed doors. Help me understand how that's different from what you claim the press has done to you." The prince's jaw tightened. Those conversations needed context. The public deserves to know the truth about what really happened, not the sanitized version that the palace wants them to believe. "The truth according to you," Savannah shot back without missing a beat. "But isn't that exactly what every tabloid editor says when they publish a story? That they're giving the public what they deserve to know?" "You can't have it both ways, Your Royal Highness. Either privacy matters or it doesn't." Harry leaned forward, his voice taking on a defensive tone. "I'm not a tabloid editor, Savannah. I'm someone who was subjected to a campaign of harassment and lies. Everything I've shared has been my own experience, my own truth." "Your own truth," Savannah repeated, letting the phrase hang in the air. "That's an interesting way to put it. Because truth, real truth, isn't subjective. It's not yours or mine or anyone else's. It simply is. And when you present your version of events as the definitive account while the other parties involved maintain their silence out of dignity, aren't you taking advantage of their restraint?" The studio fell silent, except for the hum of cameras. Harry's media training was clearly kicking in as he tried to regain his composure. "I think anyone who's been in my position would understand the need to defend themselves and their family. When you're watching lies being spread about your wife, about your children, you have a responsibility to speak up." Savannah nodded slowly. "I absolutely agree that protecting your family is paramount. But let's talk about that for a moment. You've spoken extensively about wanting privacy for your children, wanting them to grow up away from the spotlight. Yet here you are, once again, in the spotlight, talking about your family situation. Every interview you give, every project you promote, it keeps that spotlight burning bright. How is that protecting their privacy?" Harry's hands clasped together tightly. "We're trying to build a different kind of life, one where we can control our own story rather than having it controlled for us." "But that's just it," Savannah pressed, her voice gaining momentum. "You're not controlling your story, you're constantly telling it. There's a difference. Controlling your story would mean stepping back, living quietly, letting your actions speak for themselves. Instead, you're on a media tour that seems to never end. Book deals, Netflix documentaries, podcast interviews, and now this. When does it stop?" The prince's composure was starting to crack. "When the lies stop, when the harassment stops, when my family is allowed to live in peace." Savannah leaned back slightly, her expression almost pitying. "But Prince Harry, with respect to the harassment you're describing, much of it seems to be coming from your own actions now." Every time you speak publicly about your family, you're inviting more scrutiny, more commentary, more invasion into your private life. You're essentially doing to yourself what you claim the press did to you. That's completely different, Harry snapped, his royal training momentarily forgotten. I'm not making things up. I'm not twisting words or taking things out of context, aren't you, though? Savannah's voice was calm but cutting. When you share a private conversation, but only your side of it, when you describe family interactions, but filter them through your own emotions and perceptions, how is that not a form of manipulation? How is that not taking things out of context? The tension in the studio was palpable. Harry's media handlers, visible just off camera, were shifting uncomfortably. This wasn't going according to their carefully planned script. I think you're being unfair, Harry said, his voice rising slightly. I've been honest about my struggles, about my family's struggles. I've tried to bring awareness to important issues like mental health. Savannah's expression didn't soften, and that's admirable work, truly. But you don't need to weaponize your personal family drama to raise awareness about mental health. There are countless ways to advocate for important causes without burning bridges with the people who raised you, unless, of course, the family drama is the point. Unless the controversy is what sells the books and gets the interview bookings. Harry's face flushed red. How dare you suggest that I'm exploiting my own trauma for profit? You have no idea what I've been through, what my family has been through. You're right, I don't, Savannah replied evenly. But I know what you've chosen to put in the public domain, and I know that every revelation comes with a price tag attached. So forgive me if I question the purity of your motives. The silence that followed was deafening. Harry stared at Savannah, his chest rising and falling as he tried to process what had just been said to him on live television. The seasoned journalist had just accused him of profiting from his own trauma, and the accusation hung in the air like a challenge. That's a very serious allegation you're making, Harry said finally, his voice low but trembling with barely controlled anger. You're suggesting that I'm lying about my own experiences for money. Savannah remained perfectly calm, her journalist instincts in full control. I'm not suggesting you're lying about your experiences, Prince Harry. I'm questioning your motives for sharing them so publicly and so repeatedly. There's a difference between processing trauma and monetizing it. And right now, from where I'm sitting, it looks a lot like the latter. Harry's hands were visibly shaking now. You don't get to sit there in your comfortable studio and judge my healing process. You don't get to decide how I deal with decades of abuse and neglect. You're absolutely right, Savannah said, nodding. I don't get to decide that. But you invited me to, didn't you? The moment you decided to share these intimate details on television, in books, in documentaries, you opened them up for scrutiny. You can't have a public conversation and then get angry when the public, through journalists like me, asks difficult questions. The prince stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward. This is exactly the kind of treatment that drove us away from Britain in the first place, this aggressive, hostile questioning designed to make me look bad. Savannah didn't flinch as Harry loomed over her. Please sit down, Your Royal Highness. Running away from difficult questions isn't going to make them disappear. And frankly, if you can't handle basic journalistic inquiry, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews. The studio crew was frozen, unsure whether to intervene. This was live television, and everything was spiraling out of the producer's control. Harry slowly sat back down, but his posture remained rigid and defensive. Let me ask you something else, Savannah continued, her voice steady as steel. You've talked extensively about your mother's death and how it affected you. That's understandable. It was a traumatic event. But your mother spent years trying to control her own narrative too, didn't she? She gave that famous interview, she worked with biographers, she tried to tell her side of the story. How did that work out for her? Harry's face went pale. Don't you dare bring my mother into this. Your mother is already in this, Savannah replied unflinchingly. You brought her into it. You've made her memory part of your brand, part of your justification for everything you do. But here's what I find troubling. You seem to have learned all the wrong lessons from her experience. She tried to fight the system through the media, and it destroyed her. Yet here you are, making the exact same mistakes. My mother was murdered. By the press, Harry said, his voice cracking with emotion. They chased her into that tunnel. They killed her with their cameras and their harassment. Savannah's expression softened slightly, but her resolve didn't waver. "Your mother died in a tragic accident, and I'm sorry for your loss. But blaming the press for everything that went wrong in her life, and now in yours, is starting to sound like a convenient excuse for poor decision-making. At some point, you have to take responsibility for your own choices." Harry was breathing heavily now, clearly struggling to maintain his composure. "You have no idea what it's like to lose a parent that way, to grow up knowing that the world watched her die and did nothing to help her." "You're right, I don't know what that's like," Savannah acknowledged. "But I do know what it's like to be a journalist, and I know that blaming an entire profession for the actions of a few paparazzi is both unfair and counterproductive, especially when you're now working with that same media you claim to despise." "I'm working with responsible journalists who want to tell the truth," Harry protested. Savannah raised an eyebrow. "Responsible journalists like the ones who helped you write your book, the ones who encouraged you to share private conversations without the consent of the other parties involved, the ones who helped you turn your family's pain into entertainment. Those responsible journalists." Harry's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. That's not what happened." "Then tell me what did happen," Savannah pressed. "Because from the outside, it looks like you found journalists who were willing to help you weaponize your grievances in exchange for exclusive access to royal secrets. How is that different from what you claim the tabloids do?" "The prince's media training was completely abandoned now. Because I'm telling the truth, everything I've said is true." "Your version of the truth," Savannah corrected. "Your interpretation of events. Your emotional reaction to situations that involve multiple people with multiple perspectives. But you're presenting it as objective fact, and that's intellectually dishonest." Harry slammed his hand on the arm of his chair. "So you think I'm a liar? I think you're a man who's been hurt, and who's allowing that hurt to cloud his judgment," Savannah replied, her voice surprisingly gentle despite the brutal nature of her questioning. "I think you're so focused on being right, on being the victim, that you've lost sight of the damage you're doing to the very people you claim to love." "I'm protecting my family," Harry insisted, but his voice lacked conviction now. "Are you?" Savannah asked. "Because from where I sit, it looks like you're sacrificing your family's privacy and dignity to protect your own ego. Every interview you give, every revelation you make, it's another knife in the back of people who can't defend themselves without looking petty." Harry's composure finally cracked completely. "You don't know anything about my family. You don't know what they've done to me, to my wife, to my children. You sit there in your ivory tower passing judgment on people whose lives you couldn't possibly understand." Savannah's eyes flashed with something that might have been anger, but her voice remained controlled. "My ivory tower, Prince Harry, with all due respect, you're the one who was born into literal palaces. You're the one who had every advantage, every opportunity, every door open for you. And yet here you are, complaining about how hard your life has been to anyone who will listen. Do you hear how that sounds to ordinary people struggling with real problems?" The question hit like a physical blow. Harry sat back in his chair, speechless for the first time since the interview began. The studio was so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning seemed deafening. "Let me tell you about ivory towers," Savannah continued, her voice rising with passion. "An ivory tower is thinking that your family drama is more important than global poverty, climate change, or any of the actual crises facing the world. Ivory Tower is believing that your hurt feelings deserve more attention than the struggles of people who don't have the luxury of multi-million-dollar book deals to process their trauma." Harry's face had gone from red to ashen in a matter of seconds. The reality of what Savannah had just said seemed to hit him like a freight train. Here he was, a prince, complaining about his privileged life to millions of viewers who would never have a fraction of the opportunities he'd been handed at birth. "I never said my problems were more important than global issues," he stammered weakly, but even he seemed to realize how hollow the defense sounded. Savannah wasn't finished. "You didn't have to say it, Your Royal Highness. You've shown it through your actions. How many interviews have you given about climate change versus how many you've given about your family drama? How many documentaries have you made about poverty versus how many you've made about your personal grievances? Your priorities are crystal clear." The prince opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, for the first time in the interview. He seemed to be actually listening rather than just waiting for his turn to speak. "And here's what really troubles me," Savannah continued, leaning forward slightly. You had everything. You had a platform that billions of people would kill for. You had resources, influence, and the ability to make real change in the world. Instead of using that gift to lift people up, you've spent